Hello, and welcome to the second of our plenary lectures on the subject of medieval Iberia. As we've already mentioned to you a few times, you might be thinking, well, what do all of these elements, different elements that we have looked at, have in common? So we had 2 weeks at the beginning of the module on linguistic varieties. We had a couple of weeks then also on particular Hispanic identities in the contemporary Caribbean. And last time round, I was talking to you about issues to do with mixing of different religions fundamentally, but also different cultures in medieval Iberia. And it may seem to you at the moment that we are presenting you with is a wide range of really quite different things. The aim of the course is not to focus on any one of these. The aim of the course is to use diverse materials from the Hispanic world to look at a range of themes about that world. And in order to do that, as you will have seen already, we are drawing examples from what might seem to you, as I say, rather different forms of knowledge. We've seen different reactions to the diversity of Hispanic world, and we've begun to see how that diversity has historical foundations in medieval Iberia, as I mentioned to you already in the plenary in week 5. This part of the course, so the second half, I suppose, of this first semester, examines Hispanic diversity from the perspective of intolerance and tolerance. Now, last week, or just before reading week in week 5, I spoke to you about the architectural, gendered, religious expressions of intolerance and also the forging of convivencia in the medieval era. And I will come back and talk to you a little bit more about that in a moment. Afterwards, we're going to go on with Dr. Ryan and look at the notions of tolerance and convivencia through the prisms of ethnicity and globalization, space, gender again, and post-colonialism. And what we would like you to do then is to start to make significant links between the different subject matters that we have explored throughout the course so far, and to look perhaps above all at the processes of inclusion and exclusion, which are very pertinent to the formation of Hispanic culture, and contemporary Spanish society in the case of what we're going to look at now, but also thinking more broadly at the Hispanic world. So I'd like to continue then talking a little bit about the medieval aspect of this. In particular, I would like just to begin this week by returning to a couple of images which I showed you in the previous plenary. And the first is a map with dates on it. Well, the examples from the architectural examples that I mentioned to you before shows us how there are still the physical traces of Spain in a very mixed society. One in which three Abrahamic religions lived alongside each other, not always in tolerance of each other, of course, but they sometimes constructed their places of worship on the ruins of others. They sometimes lived alongside each other. And we'd like you to think about that and the way in which that evolved over time and the way in which that can tell us something about the underpinnings of what Spain became. Well, I'd like to return to two elements of that, of the way in which one can construct a story about the past. Here we have the map, which seems to tell us a story, as I mentioned to you before, of Islamic dominance of the peninsula with a gradual expansion southward by Christian kingdoms until 1492. It's the traditional view of a political form of history, the way in which the past of Spain is conceived as you can see on the map, as a reconquista, the recovering for Christianity of the territory of Spain. Most scholars don't use this term anymore. Its binary nature doesn't provide any kind of nuance about the nature of history. Maps, therefore, tell a story of one kind. a true story, but not a complete story. Another way of telling a story, making up a story about the past as a way of constructing something about the present, can be seen in the timeline. Um, I chose three key moments: the splendor of Caliph of Cordoba in the 10th century, when Islamic Andalus was one of the richest and most culturally sophisticated societies in Europe. That is a distinctive element of Spain, a distinctive element of Spanishness, and it is one which is not, um, which was not associated with Christianity. I chose another moment, which is the reign of Alfonso el Sabio, author of the Siete Partidos Law Code, which you see in seminars, and that is associated with the introduction of Castilian as the dominant language or the dominant official language in the peninsula. But at the same time, it is a moment of tremendous cultural interpenetration, the translation of scientific and cultural works from Arabic, and the composition of law codes, as we have seen, but also history and histories and other similar phenomena, which made Castile and Leon in the 13th century a culturally advanced place. Another element of that story could be another moment to choose is 1391, which was the moment of large-scale pogroms across Spain, which gave rise to the massacre of Jewish communities and would eventually lead to forced conversions to Christianity, and 100 years later, the expulsion of Jewish communities and forced conversions of Muslims also in the late 15th and early 16th century. Presented in this way, one can see the history of Iberia, of Spain, as the existence of tolerant, culturally sophisticated places in both Islamic and Christian Spain, and the gradual breakdown of that tolerance, and the existence, therefore, of a monolithic Christianity, an Orthodox Christianity, towards the end of the period. Just like the map, however, that is not entirely true either, and there is always a degree of nuance about explaining the past, the underpinnings of any present. Islamic Spain was never completely Islamic, nor was Christian Spain entirely Christian. And our challenge, therefore, is to think of ways in which different communities did live alongside each other. And I will return to a literary example, popular literary example, and a parallel cultured literary example at the end of this plenary. And we will think about ways in which communities live alongside each other, and that living alongside each other can go along to to create something, to create a mixed society, or perhaps ways also in which that mixing can be elided in the creation of the present.